many afternoons going home with migraine or tight headaches from working in a closed room without a vent, and even something as you would think that black anodized aluminum wouldn't cause any problems, but it will. And wood, and especially the plastics and the coated brass, are really bad. And by far the worst that I've run across is rubber. I can tell you this: if I was in the rubber stamp business, I'd find another business. That's nasty stuff I've ever seen.
Well, I have chlorine gas.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I heard you burn rubber anyways on the weekend.
Yeah, I do. In fact, all during the week. I'm going to buy stock in P.F. Goodrich, I think. Also, one thing that John and Joe Carter brought up is the material safety data sheets. Joe, would you briefly?
The material safety data sheet is something that every shop should have on anything that they're working with, especially if you have employees. If OSHA comes into your shop and you don't have the MSDS sheets on the equipment that you're running, or the stuff that you're burning, you're subject to a massive fine. Make sure that your suppliers supply you with MSDS sheets, and you will yellow book, notebook, have your employees, or you tell your customers have their employees read it and sign it.
Joe and John have been talking about the material safety data sheets.
Yes,
Can we get those to include in the manuals?
so many different.
For the basic materials that our trade uses.
It'd be the product supplier.
Yeah,
If the
it's
supplier of the
itself.
material has to give you that.
Yeah.
Does it have to give you that?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's different.
Can we?
They're required
Okay,
to do that.
okay. So it's up to you to pass that on to your customers, but we should make sure something about it is in the manual. Is there anything in this new manual about it?
I'm sure it is.
Okay. Good.
There's a lot of warnings in there, especially checking the MSDS on things like PVC, which we came across that one with a guy who couldn't figure out why the pigeon was dying out by his exhaust fan.
Vision was dying.
Cyanide gas.
Yes, give the hydrogen cyanide, same thing used in gas chambers.
And we call that a benefit, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Pigeons?
Okay, so there are, again, you should, when you do an installation of one of these machines, you should review the safety hazards and the safety functions of this laser. For instance, the way the interlocks work. I would stress highly that you make sure your customer, don't leave it up to the customer, make sure that he has a ventilation system for the laser, even if you have to sell it to him, which we encourage. This new vent that I believe, Scott, was that you? This thing is awesome. We had one that we bought from Granger. It was a Dayton, and besides being noisy, it was not real efficient, and it cost over twice as much as this one. Scott came up with this thing. We got one of them, and we've been using it ever since, and it works twice as good as the one we had. It cost half as much. You're looking at about $180 retail for this.
The other thing that's bad about it is it doesn't come in 240 or 240.
Right. So it's only 110 bucks.
$180 where?
What's the manufacturer's name on that again, John?
It's a
Reliant.
Reliant.
Where do you get that?
What's the horsepower on it?
We just buy it through a catalog.
It should be at least a half horsepower.
Actually, it's a 1 horsepower. It's 1 horsepower.
horsepower.
You know what
500
catalog?
CFM.
What catalog? What company?
I can get you a Drew.
Oh, appreciate it. Yeah.
No, right here.
Roy's gonna get you.
Oh, yeah, Roy had it.
Anyway, for 180 bucks,
That's a deal.
that's a
We have switched to Penn Industries,
10. Okay.
800-377-7297. 1.5 horsepower.
Say again the number.
800-377-7297. That's Penn Industries.
Thank
Are
you,
we gonna
Roy.
include these on our accessory sheet at some point?
we can.
Yeah, that would be cool. Especially like for when you're making out something at a trade show.
My intent is to buy these much like we buy the vacuum pumps from gas right now.
There you go.
The problem is, of course, and I don't have to tell you guys, you're all commissioned salesmen. By the time I buy them and we give a commission to you know, so I mean, this may be a little bit of give and take on both parts, both of us. Because the customer can buy it for about the same thing I can pay for it. Unless we can work the deal up. But we'll try to start supplying these too.
Yeah, because this is a 4
That's
inch.
a 4 and a 5, isn't
No,
it?
it's 4 to 6. And 4 inch in, 6 inch out, and comes with rewards.
Personally, I
Where'd the little
find getting
stand?
involved in that, you're setting
Okay, what-
yourself up for liability if that isn't adequate in the building.
Is it pretty loud?
Yes, it's nice and loud.
It is? Well, no, when you have it outside, you don't hear it at all.
Oh, okay.
John does bring up a valid point here. that we take on a certain amount of liability by furnishing this to them. I can tell you for a fact that this one works a lot better than the Granger we had in the beginning. And so this, at 500 CFM, I believe that's what you recommended, didn't you, Joe, 500 CFM? So the 500 CFM number is the magic number. Now, this installation that Roy Brewer just did with John, they had an extremely expensive air cleaning extraction system on it. I think I paid $6,000 for it, if I'm not mistaken. And so it was very expensive. However, it was very effective, from what everybody told me.
Well, also in the blowers, it's important to have that at the end of the run.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
if you have it in the front of the run, you have positive flow and you're going to develop a leak and vent right back in the office.
Yeah, this should be as close to the outside as you can make it.
I can run it, you want to hear it?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
But it's locked water with
The photo's not on it right now anyway, so.
Yeah, see, when you,
Yeah, like we have a hose, the noise comes outside with it.
It does. In fact, we run it over there all the time. You can't hear it. Okay, so do we have any questions about safety? Reliant is the name on this one. Okay, we'll get you the part numbers. This is the model number NN, like Nancy 620.
I know what it's like.
And it's Reliant, and we'll get you the, we'll get you the, where you can buy these. And like I said, we're probably going to start supplying these or keeping an inventory of them so you can buy from our supply if you want to. Any questions on safety? Joe?
One of the, along the lines of safety, isn't true with this new laser, the blower will turn off and on with the start button?
Yes. In fact,
And so the customer couldn't mess up and vent back into their, you know, like, I've caught customers running their machine and they forgot to turn the blower on.
right. Back here on the back, which I don't want to turn this thing around, but you're walking through around and look, there's a, like a DIN connector, and you just plug it in, and then there's a 110 volt power source for the blower. And so it will control the on and off. So it'll automatically, if you turn the laser on, the blower will come.
Can we order this yet?
Yeah, and we've got several. In fact, you delivered one of those.
So it's not off and
Yeah.
on, it's not off and on with the start button, it's off and on with the on-off button.
That's the way it is right now. I personally had intended for it to be where, much like our Xenetech rotary machines, it came on whenever the machine started. And we may still do that. For now, it comes on whenever the laser's on. Okay. Though with the, probably and eventually it will go on and off along with the start button.
Well, with the start button, one of the things that I push when I tell people to buy our solid vac pump is I know they're not going to plug in R2 vac tube into the back of that thing and take out the tri-arc. Where if we're selling our own blower, we know if it's turning off and on with the start button that they're not going to hook up something that sucks too much juice and take out a component.
Well, this is,
I'm sorry, we're actually building this new cord so that you can't pick up.
Cool.
Yeah, it'll take the fuse out before it takes everything else out.
and we get calls almost every day from some guy that says, I keep blowing the 6 amp fuse when I plug my 25 amp shop vac that's this tall into the back.
R2
Why?
vac tube, yeah.
You know, so, any questions on safety? Okay, I'll take that as a no. Power requirements, yes. Exhaust system. No, seriously, this, the smaller two lasers do use 110 volt U-ground type receptacles. And the chiller for the 50 watt takes a 110 volt, however, 20 amp receptacle, which is the one, instead of having the two vertical poles, one's turned 90 degrees to the other, and that is a particular requirement for 20 amp circuits. I can tell you this though, I made a box, put a 20 amp breaker in my receptacle, in my breaker panel over there, and I was running my radio, my computer, the laser, the chiller, the whole 9 yards off that 120 amp circuit. So the 100 watt chiller is a 220, and is the 100 watt laser 220? Yes, it is. And we've got twist lock receptacle, and John and the idea people have worked to standardize on a particular type of plug. And the first 100 watt we got had no plugs on it. And they worked together to find the correct kinds of plugs, and I think you're going to start putting those plugs on now. There are twist lock type 220. Believe it or not, there's probably 40 different kinds of twist locks. So you have to be careful which one you specify. If you do sell a 100-watt laser, you need to make sure that that customer knows he's going to have a special receptacle for it. Otherwise, you're going to go on site and you're going to be waiting around for the electrician to show up.
Can't you go to Home Depot and buy it? Is it easy enough to
Yes,
buy?
we
Oh,
tried.
yeah,
I
it's
told
a
Darren I
standard
wanted something I could buy at Vernon's Hardware.
Well, it's a standard NEMA, L6, 15 and 12, 20 for the laser on 100 watt and 15 for the chiller.
So it'd be a common item at electrical supply houses?
Yes,
They won't be dead in the water.
no. We tried to make it as standard as possible.
Now, the ones overseas and everything, you know, also will supply that is the plug that plugs in the back of the unit, but just bare wires on the other end, just so they can put their own plugs on it, because that's standard how they do it over
That's
there.
what we do with our rotary machines now. Now, I can tell you this, grounding is important with these machines, just like it is with any other, especially electronic device. You cannot have a system running off a 2-wire non-grounded circuit and expect good results. It's got to have a U-ground if it's one of these lasers, and you need to make sure the whole system is grounded no matter what. And these old buildings, they had the old 2-wire 14 with the, without a U-ground connector. They need to install a new receptacle grounded back to the panel. It's got to be there, otherwise there could be problems. So I can't stress that grounding is important enough. And it would actually be wise for them, if they had the facility to do it, is to actually dedicate a breaker solely to running the laser equipment. Just like we would suggest the same thing for our rotary equipment. Now, I can tell you these things are very forgiving. I've had them running on the end of a 50-foot extension cord and they work fine. But that's in my shop and I'm the one that's paying attention to it. Of course it's going to work fine. You're going to go out on site and plug it in, it's not going to work. So because it will work on the end of a 50-foot extension cord in my office doesn't mean anything. So I can't stress the electricity enough. Joe, you installed an awful lot of lasers. Have you had any problems?
The only thing I've run into is that they try to run too many rotary machines with the older rotary tables real close to it. It puts out interference, RF, and sometimes the servo motors mess up. And all I've done is just move their table to the other side of the building and it takes care of it. But I had that same thing happen with Star, with a System 100 big card motor next to it.
Yeah, well, the Carter motors scream RF.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
And the other thing I make them do is buy an isobar surge protector, because of all the surge protectors I've seen, most of them are just glorified extension cords. The
That's it.
isobar tends to give, so if it's a box, not a strip.
I can tell you another good investment. We've started buying them recently because the price has become so good, and it's well worth the $90, is a 5-minute UPS, uninterruptible power supply. I have one on my computer now, and it saved me more grief than I can tell you.
Trip light.
Yes, it's good for 5 minutes. There's enough time, I'm running my monitor in, the whole 9 yards off of it. Plus, it's going to be a far better surge protector than one of those $9.95 Radio Shack jobs.
Now I got a question for John on 220. I don't know that I've ever seen a surge protector for 220.
Well,
They
they
must
do
have
that,
them.
they got the money.
So they're hyper expensive.
Oh, yeah.
The main idea of a surge protector is to keep a surge out.
Right.
These things, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but I think this is true. They have filters in them.
Oh yeah.
When lightning took out everything in our building, it actually hit the incoming line and sheared it. There were 2 lasers on burn-in, and everything was burned except those lasers.
But for a $25,000 investment, a $90 UPS or something would well be worth the money. In fact, John was whining and crying because I had a UPS and he didn't. So we got him.
Only after losing data, 5, 10 different times.
It's only good for 5 minutes, but that's plenty long enough.
Yeah, it's plenty long enough to click 5 and save.
Now, I can tell you this. The other day I was running, we had a terrific lightning storm here 3 weeks ago. In fact, it hit our network and took it down. We had a lightning strike, must have been within a block of here because it rattled the whole place. I was running the laser at the time. My UPS started beeping because the power had gone off and come right back on. Well, the laser never missed a lick. It kept right on running. Now, I'm assuming part of that is the capacitance that's built into the system. Because when you turn this thing off, it takes a good 5 to 10 seconds for the fans to quit running. So there's a lot of capacitance in here, so that momentary loss of power didn't stop the laser from running. It kept right on going. So
The other thing I've run into that with the customers, you'll call a customer and you'll say, do you have an isolated line for this? And they'll say yes, and really 9 times out of 10 what they mean is they have a free receptacle.
Yeah, the bottom of it's free.
Yeah, and so I tell them, there could be 9, 10 receptacles on one circuit breaker. Go back to your circuit breaker box, plug a lamp into that one where you think you're going to plug the laser and turn off the circuit breaker. Tell me what else goes off. Oh, just a refrigerator and the, R2 VAC 2 and I've run into that where they had a huge old clunker refrigerator on the same circuit breaker.
Well, these things don't seem to be very susceptible to flaky power, but for this kind of investment, it's worth setting up a particular
What
research.
sort of consumption are they?
They're very low. Like I was telling you earlier, I had the 50-watt laser and the chiller and my radio and my computer and everything else plugged into a terminal strip on a 20-amp breaker. So do you know what the power consumption is on this?
It's fairly low. I don't remember.
10 amps maybe?
I think
Well, it's rated at 10 amp fuse on there, but it runs probably about 4 amps.
somewhere between 4 and 6 amps.
Right.
And at peaks at 8. Like if it hits 10, it trips the fuse.
Yeah, the 50 watts is going to be higher than that.
Cat hours.
And the 200 watts actually going to be a little lower because of the efficiency on the voltage. They were actually running on a 5 amp fuse.
Actually, with the 50 watt, you're running basically two 25 watt lasers, linear. So your power supply will probably be around 8 amps.
Any questions?
Yeah, just the biggest issue on these is make sure your customer puts a blower on the surface or get that, because that's a 1.5 horsepower motor.
I would recommend that, yes. For any kind of vacuum or blower system. What they can do, if they want to have it switch automatically, is use this circuit to switch a relay for another circuit. So that they can have, I think, isn't that what you did then? Yeah. He's using the output just to switch a relay to turn another 110-volt circuit on.
That's what our new part does.
The plug is a male and a female.
That's right, it plugs into the wall.
All it is a dumb switch on male and female, so you can circuit it any way you want.
Good. Any questions? Okay, exhaust systems, we've kind of already talked about them. The recommended is 1 horsepower 500 CFM. To be honest with you, I don't think you can have too much CFM on these lasers. One of the tricks we do around here, and this is something I did showed us early on, is if you're only lasing in this part of the table, you can block off your second set of holes on the other side of the plenum, and that'll restrict all the air to come through the first set of holes on this side. It makes a tremendous difference in the amount of smoke reduction in this area. And the plenum that's on this machine is very effective. It will definitely evacuate the machine. It's amazed me how quickly it'll remove the smoke. Because a lot of times I'll start the thing and forget about turning the blower on, and it'll fill up with smoke. And I'll put the blower on, and within an instant, it's already cleared out. So it works quite well.
One thing you need to remember is don't use the plastic dryer duct at the end of it because sometimes you can, suck flames down the plenum.
In fact, that was one thing we talked about at the last meeting. See that? That's flammable stuff right there. So occasionally you need to take this thing off and clean it. Everybody know how this fits on the back? And so you can see that after a while you get a pretty good buildup of stuff, and that's flammable. Yeah, real quick. And so I agree with John 100%. This should be that metal ductwork if possible.
Also, one thing that people forget about is actually that ductwork and everything, and they tell you in dryer installations to change that every once in a while, depending on the type of work you're doing, because it can also flash, because it's going to build up all on the inside, just like our normal drain pipe. It's going to build up and restrict your airflow.
We kind of skipped around here a little bit. Are there any questions on the exhaust system? If you have a customer that's going to be doing rubber stamps, Roy just did an installation with what do they call that, an extractor cleaner, or they had a name for it. No, odor reduction, right. And it was quite effective from what John and Roy told me. For the price, it should have whistled Dixie and paid your bills for you too, because it was very expensive. We got a distributor's discount on it and paid $6,000 for the thing. So, whoa. Yeah. However, these people do nothing but rubber stamps, so if you think about it, on a $50,000 laser, they want to make sure that whatever odor is there is minimized. Now, the only problem with the rubber is once you take the rubber out of the laser, it's going to stink to high heaven, so it's kind of hard to eliminate that.
Was that an outdoor unit?
No, well, it ducted to the outdoor, but the whole unit itself stood right next to the laser, about 2 or 3 feet from the laser. I was amazed.
And how much air does that hold?
That was right around, I think, 8 to 1,000 CFM.
But it also had filter packs in it.
Or was it charcoal?
Yes, in fact, remember, you've seen our filter packs we take to the trade shows. They have the carbon and the fiber. I think it has filter packs just like that. Filter packs were $320 for this thing. So, however, for general engraving, this little blower right here, they were lazing all day yesterday in my office, not in my office, down the hall from my office, with the people from China. And they were cutting plastic and God knows what else, and I'd never smelled a thing. So this works beautifully, especially if you wait a second after you finish lazing to let this thing completely evacuate before you open the door. It takes out all the smell. And this is a good little unit here. It's far better than the one we were using before. Any other questions? Okay, chiller. Everybody knows what the chiller is and what it does? Okay, the 25 watt is fan cooled, air cooled. And thank goodness they finally got straight on how much air actually needs to be blown over the thing, because the old Microgram sounded like a Tu-104 Bear, which is the loudest airplane on the planet. And with turboprops going supersonic tips. So that's the way this thing, the old Microgram sounded. This has far less cooling in it. However, it doesn't overheat. So that's the only thing we care about. The 50 watt does need a chiller, so does the 100 watt. They are not the same chiller. They are two distinctly different chillers. The 50 watt will run without the chiller, which doesn't make any sense to me, but it's true. And in fact, when you guys were here in May, that first morning session we had with the 50 watt, I thought the chiller was on. But I had turned the switch on, but I forgot to plug it in the wall. So we ran that whole morning with the 50 watt laser without the chiller running, and it ran fine. Now, eventually what would happen is it would get hot enough that it would kick out.
Yeah,
It does have,
that deteriorates a lot too.
yes, and it does have a thermal protection in it, so it will refuse to work. That's the saving grace with all these, is they do have thermal protection in it. I would not try to run this 25 watt laser in a 110 degree environment. It's just too hot for it. So this is a room temperature type machine. However, the 50 watt and the 100 watt, if you had a warmer environment, the chiller would keep the tube cooled down. Interestingly, Joe Hoffman had his chiller fail. He has a 100 watt, and his water temperature quickly went to 45 degrees. That's centigrade, by the way. Now, his laser, the chiller was running. It was circulating water, but the freon leaked out of the damn thing. So it was no longer chilling the water. So it went from room temperature to 42 degrees, 45 degrees centigrade in a short period of time. The laser continued to operate because it did have line pressure, and that's what it's sensing. However, eventually it got warm enough where it sensed that it was getting too hot and it shut itself off. And nothing was harmed other than Joe getting mad because his brand new chiller leaked all the freon out of it.
By the way, you can get the 25 watt, that's water cooled also.
How much does that add, Joe?
A couple thousand.
The chiller is actually the big part of that. Right?
Actually, when you add the chiller in there, it's right around 4,000.
Okay, so a couple grand for the chiller, a couple grand for the modification. Is that it's like a different pan or can that it fits in?
Yeah, it's a case.
Case.
Right,
Tubing.
whole new case.
Is it anything that anybody would ever want to do?
Not unless they're working, like you say, in the warehouse routinely at 110 degrees.
So
We
y'all,
have seen that.
you may want to make note of that there is a water-cooled option on this, which would raise the price for about $4,000.
I don't know the exact price. The chiller itself is $2,100.
It's the same chiller it's used on the 50.
Right, we use the same chiller, the 33.
Just in case any of you run into it, because I did, it'll save you a lot of hassle. If a chiller ever gets drop shipped to a customer site from the manufacturer, mine got drop shipped from New Hampshire and came to me in Massachusetts. And it didn't have the connectors that the hoses plug into. So I said, no big deal. Got a plumbing supply house close to me, I'll go grab some. Well, I went and grabbed some brass. We had to use a couple of adapters, and I think I got what I needed. And I carefully put them in, Teflon tape, the whole thing, thought I had it right, turn it on, they leak. Under pressure it would leak. Turn the unit off, it wouldn't leak, of course. So finally, after wrestling with that for a long time, couldn't get it squared away, I said, well, why don't I just do the smart thing and get the stainless steel connectors from IDEA. So they sent them along with the hoses, because those were missing. And I Teflon tape those and put them in carefully. Plug in the hoses, turn the thing on under pressure, leaked. Well, after calling the manufacturer of the chiller and you guys, they said what you want to get is a tube of Teflon sealant. Most plumbing supply houses carry it. Solve my problem. So if you ever have a chiller installation, not only do you want to have Teflon tape, but go to a plumbing supply house. This will save you a lot of hassle. And get yourself a small tube of this Teflon sealant. Looks like a gray paste. And what you want to do is you just want to put enough of it around the threads so that it'll make a seal. You don't need to go crazy with it. But that little conversation right there that was about a minute and a half was really for me about 8 real hours of hassle.
I ran into that in escalation. I went through it like 2 hours going back and forth until we got it where we were leaking.
Right now, and I apologize for you getting done without the hoses. When we ship the 50 watt, part of the checklist is to include the hoses and the connectors and everything in there. And
The connectors are now, because the one I got, the connectors were plastic. And we had
They're stainless.
Yeah,
They work,
stainless.
but I haven't seen one leak yet.
Yeah.
So, and there is another thing they've done to facilitate getting them together so that the high side's on the high side, the low side's on the low side. They've started putting red dots
That
and
helps.
red tape on the Gazina and the Gazada. Video, that means, huh? Gazina, Gazada? Okay.
The only problem with that is if most of the chillers are drop shipped directly to the customer site. If we have the chiller, we put the red tape on the chiller itself and the hoses. If it's drop shipped directly, the hoses will have the red tape on the end of it.
It is marked in and out, though.
Right. But the end on the chiller is the out.
In to out.
Yeah.
The Gazina? The Gazada? Okay. Any questions? Oh, water. They recommend that you use distilled water, and I back that. It all depends on where you are. Here in Louisiana, our water straight out of the tap in Baton Rouge is damn near the same thing you get. You pay whatever it is for distilled water. Our water is so clean and so soft. But if you were, say, where Jim lives, I wouldn't use tap water. I mean, that stuff's got more iron and God knows what else in it. Distilled water is definitely what you should be using with the chiller.
Put a little chlorine in the water too?
Wouldn't hurt.
Little,
Chlorox.
Yeah.
Now, you're currently using black tubing. Perhaps one of these days we may want to go back to clear when you clear out all that black, because the clear at least will show you that it's starting to get algae in it.
The one you can put here, there is a little note on there that says use tap water.
It does?
Yes.
Because, well, the one that I just installed there, it said use distilled.
Our instructions said use distilled, and that's what I questioned, because I'd always understood you're supposed to put that water.
Really? Because because it was, I'm not sure whose tag it was, but the tag right on the chiller.
Yeah, my instructions said use distilled too.
Maybe we need to get straight on which is preferable. Maybe where you are, again, if you're getting tap water in Minnesota, you may want to think about using distilled. Around here, I've never bothered, but we'll find out for a fact which way is which, since we're getting two different things. Okay, any questions on the chillers? Okay. I'm on computer connections. Let's see.
And we got about 15 minutes.
Okay. Of course, this is a serial device, so all you're doing is using a RS-232 serial cable to plug it in. It plugs in right back here. And there is software to install. I don't want to get too involved in it. There is, this machine has what's called firmware. Everybody know what I'm talking about with firmware? And the reason we call it that is because it is stored in a permanent memory in this computer that can be written to more than one time. It's called flash memory. And as we upgrade the program, which we are constantly doing right now, then you'll be getting software updates from us on a hopefully regular basis for at least a while. And we are making quite a few changes to the improvements, not just changes for the sake of changing. And like I told the last group, we used to have a new version of the APU software every single time we sent out a master, because we were constantly working and improving it. Now, we haven't had a software update on the APU board for a year and a half. until recently because we added the engraving speed, so we added something new. You'll eventually see that be the case with the laser. For now, we're still involved, the software is evolving. And so it's a very straightforward thing to install the firmware into this laser. There's 2 utilities that you can use that comes from Xenetech. There are a series of keyboard commands that have to be issued. We've got those written down. And anybody that wants to do it, is, in fact, Joe, you've done it, haven't you? Yes. I mean, it's really not a big deal. And
We could make a little setup file though, to where a customer could actually do that, because like I say, it's automatic. I almost got the thing memorized now.
eventually we want to incorporate it directly into the front end. So that it's just update.
Update, well, as long as I got the disk and it takes off.
Right.
Yeah.
COM port. I'm going to jump over a couple of these things. COM port, we are looking for a standard RS-232 type port. One of the problems we've run into, and this has been an ongoing issue, is we have a customer that has a brand spanking new Pentium, and they plug it into COM2. It's got COM1 and COM2 on the back, and then the software will work. And so he goes in, he looks at his Windows settings, and there's no COM2 showing there. Well, to make a long story short, the computer manufacturers are building these things with 2 COM ports on them, but they're not turning on the second COM port in the CMOS setup. Everybody know what I'm talking about, CMOS? My computer in my office is a perfect example. I got a new laser, brought it in there, plugged it in, it didn't work. Well, it's because I did have a COM2, but it was turned off in the CMOS. So you had to go in there and enable COM2. Then I had to reboot my computer and let the plug and play in Windows find it. Now, in the earlier versions of the software, it was up to you as the installer to make sure that you went into the Windows setup, into the control panel, and went to the serial ports and configured that serial port to match the laser. Now, I know that that was a hard thing to do, to have to do that, so y'all are laughing, that was a joke. Be able to go in there and set the right settings, so we took that away from you now. There is no settings that you have to set in the control panel any longer. Xenetech decides what it's talking to and configures the port correctly. So you could have the port set to 300 baud if you want to. It doesn't matter. Xenetech will configure the port correctly the first time it goes to it. It does not affect any other devices using that serial port. And so don't even worry about the COM port settings. I would suggest heartily that when you first sit down on the computer, you go into the control panel and look and make sure COM2 is showing in the list of COM ports. If it's not, then you need to start looking at other things, CMOS settings for one thing.
Unless they have a modem, which almost always defaults to COM2, so
Yes.
you're on COM3 or
Right.
4.
Well, you can use COM1 through 4. I didn't see a reason to go any higher than that. Windows, I believe, allows you 9 or something like that. But you should be.
Jay, you're saying Xenetech goes in and automatically changes the COM port? or
No,
does the
that's not what I'm
port-
saying. I'm saying that Xenetech configures the port for communications the way it wants it to be done. But it does not affect what you see in the control panel.
So it's still, say, 3600, 9600.
It could be 300.
Right.
It could be 7 odd, 2 stop bits.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It just has to be there.
Okay.
However, there is one qualification to this whole thing. You now have 2 different kinds of laser configurations. You have the Meistergram laser, which is a table type 19. Everybody know what I'm talking about, table type? Now, by telling it it's a table type 19, that tells it that the laser is working at 38.4 kbaud. If it's a table type 9, then it's one of these lasers and it's talking to 57.6 kbaud. And so that's the only thing that you have to make sure is that if you're using a Meistergram laser, it's a table 19. If it's a Xenetech laser, it's a table 9. And other than that, the configuration of the port is handled automatically. The only other thing you have to do is in the table defaults. John, do a control table, please. Where it says laser COM port, right there, you have a choice of 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's up to you to make sure that those match what the computer's got on it. And save your preferences when you get through. And so the only thing that you have to do in Xenetech is configure which port it's talking to. The only thing you have to do in the control panel is just maybe ascertain that the actual COM port is there and functioning. Problems. Well, I think I've kind of covered that. The most ongoing issue we've had is the fact that their new computer just doesn't have the COM port turned on. And that's a simple thing to fix if you know how to do it. And basically, it's boot the computer, press Del, so it'll put you into the CMOS settings, go to the second on most computers, where it gives you a list of all the different items, and you'll see COM 1 and COM 2, and then have enable and disable. Maybe cursor to where it says disable, press space bar or up, page up, or whatever it is they tell you to do. Enable it, exit by saving, and then reboot your computer, and you should be good to go. Is that fair? Okay. Any questions? I will tell you this, that hopefully next year, shortly after the first of the year, we'll begin to see some USB boards from Xenetech, and USB will be awesomely fast. I mean, it'll actually be approaching 1 megabit per second of data transfer, and at that point, you won't even be able to get out of your chair quick enough to come over here. Let's put it that way. It'll be already downloaded by the time you get over there. Even at 57.6, with the way I've written the software, it starts downloading to the laser as soon as it accumulates 50K worth of data. Even if the job itself is going to be 10 megabytes for download, Xenetech's already downloading by the time it's got the first 50K accumulated. And in my office, I don't have enough time to get out of my chair and walk over and press the button. It's ready to run when I get there. So that is not, I know that some of our competitors are going to make it an issue, the fact we don't use a printer port, but I guarantee you, give me anybody from Epilogue or Universal, and I'll challenge even you, you use CorelDRAW, I use Xenetech, and I guarantee I'll be smoking a cigarette outside before you even get the layout.
You know, light it off the laser.
I'll light it off the laser. Download times aren't an
After
issue.
finish.
Also, the amount of memory in this laser may be an issue with some of your competitors. We only have 4 megabytes, but because we're controlling it directly, you actually have how much hard drive space do you have on your computer. There is no job limit on this machine. I've personally done jobs up to 32 megabytes, which took all day long, by the way. They're great. So it's not an issue. Anybody says it is, tell them to call me.
Need a longer cable?
You can get any link cable you want.
That's just a straight through cable, John?
I've got 2 of them in my office. I've got 2 of these cables plugged back to back. And the limit, practical limit on a serial cable is probably somewhere around 100 feet.
Yeah, but for the laser, you really want to try to stay, 25 feet or less.
Our docs say we ship a 6, and we actually ship a 4.
Is it a 4?
That's what we got.
That's what we got down there, but I thought that was 6.
I thought they were 2.
The docs said a 6, but that's still painfully short.
4-foot uses.
That 4 foot was, it was a 4-foot cable?
Yeah, the one we got down there for the 100 watts is a 4-foot cable.
Would it be hard to go to a 10-foot cable?
Not at all.
Because that's such a pain in the neck.
That's
6 feet is so marginal.
Like I said, I've got 2. I've got a 10-foot and a 6-foot stuck together in my office.
That's 3/4 across the machine.
Well, I'll make sure, Joe and I'll talk some more, and we'll upgrade that to at least a 10-footer.
Or even longer, we can at 12.
We're not talking much
12
really
foot
at
would be
all.
ideal. And I believe they make a 15-foot cable also as a standard issue cable.
I'd say 12 foot would be good.
Okay.
12 foot would be perfect.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. The laser models, as you all know, we have 3 distinctly different, but all the same. The 25, 50, and 100 watt all share there's 100% commonality in parts except for the laser tube and the power supply. And of course, the fact that it's got water connections on it. But the optics on these machines are rated to 1500 watts, I believe, which is 15 times more than 100 watts. So you figure it out yourself, that the optics are definitely a superior set of optics. And I just finished signing off on the warranty on the optics on this laser, and I can tell you this, that if I get a set of optics in that look like these optics over here, I'm going to deny a warranty on. It's up to the customer to keep those optics clean. Joe can show it to you, and he can demonstrate to you why these failed. That lens right there costs $600. So your customer, you can't stress to your customer enough that they've got to keep these things clean. There's only 2 things that you do in maintenance on these machines. One's keep them clean, the other's keep them lubricated. However, you can actually clean them to the detriment of the laser, of the optics. Joe's got one right there that they scratched when they were cleaning it. And so, I mean, you can't stress that too much as far as keeping these
How do you
clean.
recommend cleaning the optics? Do you pop them out or do you, in the lens?
You unscrew them, they're in the kits, there's 2 items in the kit here. One is the lint-free rag, and the other is the Q-tip. The lint-free rag we recommend that you use with the denatured alcohol to clean these lens. This lens here was not that one. This one here was clean with Kleenex. And you'll see it when it's scratched beyond repair. I mean, there's no way you can repair it. They just stuff Kleenex in there and wipe it around. You do not use glasses cleaner. The glasses cleaner leaves a film over the lens, and it will burn the optics off. And that, if you don't clean them and you're doing plastic and it flames up, smokes up, it'll heat up and just crack big time in the lens. And it doesn't take long to do that.
Can you use lens tissue once those dryers are gone?
I'm sorry?
Like regular Kodak lens tissue with BDH
No.
alcohol?
It scratches it. This is a lint-free rag that we include the sample of it in there. And there is a lot of different places you can buy.
Are we gonna have these kits on the accessories list so that people
They
run out
they
and
come
order
with
more?
the lasers.
Okay, but let's say they run out after 6 months. And
I'll tell you what we'll do.
a lot of people are paranoid about going and buying something else.
Joe, if you could give me where you buy this product, we'll start stocking it and selling it in kits. We'll have kits put together at modest prices.
Where do you buy these at?
We buy them out of Rangers, I believe.
A Ranger?
Is that what you're calling chem wipes?
No,
These are lint-free rags.
no, the Kim wipes, I don't think I have any in here.
They're a lint-free rag. It's a woven rag, so that it doesn't scratch. It's used for these $50 million lenses that they send out into outer space.
Now, again, because the optics, the lens is recessed, are you taking the lens out of the holder to clean it?
No.
You don't have to do that, no.
But you can take the lens out of the hole.
Yeah, you
will
can't
come
take.
out.
Right.
And by the way, you might stress to your customers when they do that, they have to make sure that they get this ring back in there tight, because when it's going at 65 inches per second, and all of a sudden they say, wow, what happened to my engraving? And they spend 2 hours on the phone with John or me, and tonight, and come to find out the lens is floating.
I tell you what though, I did find one clue. It's easy to tell when the laser's dirty, when the lens is dirty. It didn't cut anything.
Right.
That's pretty dirty.
What's
That's
the,
from cigarettes.
Joe, what's the biggest tube we can get in this box? Could we go 200, 300, or?
A 200 watt we can put in here, but we have to bubble out the back
Okay.
on the bottom. We have looked at the new 300 watt, and they come out with
We've got a 500 now.
the 500 watt also, and we're looking at doing some design work with that also.
So when we go, is there a certain wattage, if we go above it, we would have to change something else that we burn through?
Yes, with 200 watt, for example, we took out a lens like this in about 10 seconds. I mean, the 200 watt that was shipped to Taiwan, Sam turned the beam on and it melted the lens.
So the mirrors will handle up to 1500 watts, but the lens won't.
The problem wasn't the heat going to the lens, it was the heat coming up underneath the lens. No,
Are
we had a plane right up to the top.
That's what I'm trying to get to. Okay.
Yeah, we've got about 2 minutes.
Yeah, that's the problem. We don't have a lot of time left, so there are many items here that we haven't had a chance to cover. The keypad on this machine includes, I think there's 12 different menu choices. Is that 12? I think, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
And
It's changed a lot from the time that you guys first saw it running.
what we've done is any of the menu choices that open a second menu choice, like a dialogue, it has 2 dots after the name, just like it does in Xenetech on any of our menu choices open dialogues. There's a whole thing in here he's got for submenus and menu structures, and about rise and edge. The best explanation I've heard about rise and edge is that even though the speed light's fairly quick, it still takes things time to react. So rise would be turning the laser tube on before it really wants it to be on, to give the laser tube time to start firing and get out to the part. And then edge would be just the opposite. It takes the laser a second, actually microseconds, to go off after you turn it off. And so the rise of the edge, when it's doing rastering, is to tell it when to turn the laser on early, so it'll be firing when it's supposed to be, and when to turn the laser off early, so it'll go off by the time it gets to where it's supposed to go off. And that's
Yeah,
what drives
let me,
the
let me explain something there also. In there, which isn't in the manual or anything, there's the last menu choice is pattern, and run the pattern. There's a pattern in there that you set the speed and everything from your rates menu, or whatever speed you run at, but normally 50 into the settings will be 74. Then you go down there and you run pattern. The pattern will run a series of hash lines. It'll move over to a particular location, run a series of hash lines, and then stay right there. So you compare those hash lines to find out what your edges and everything are looking like. It's a series of edges. And then you adjust your rise and your edge according to how they are. Then once you get them set where they're all lined up, then you save preferences or save
Now-
defaults.
Those rising edge, are they also hold true if I was at 15?
Yeah, you set them for the fastest. You know, I
Right.
use at 50 or 60. And once they're set there, they'll apply for those speeds.
speed light's fast enough that the difference between 15 and 50 is not.
That doesn't really count.
But there's going to be two. There's going to be two patterns that, which is only got one in there right now. We're going to run another pattern, which is going to be a small job that will run. That you can run independent. You don't have to have it hooked up to the computer. You can do all the setup and everything on the system without having it one time in the computer.
In fact,
Once the software loads too.
There's enough extra memory here. We could load some base jobs that you could run without a computer. Your logo. That's a good idea.
Your phone number, Paul.
Your phone number.
I'd like to put Kirk's phone number on all the lasers I install.
I know you do.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're really not going to have time to cover a lot of this stuff, but the beam alignment, we can't stress enough. There is definitely a strict criteria for aligning the beam.
Are we going to do that?
We're going to try. Whether it's tomorrow during the software class, I'm not sure, because right now you just gave me 5 minutes.
I know. That's not, I really want to.
Yeah, it's really pretty simple, especially in the service routine and the keypad, because the service routine, turn off the motors. One thing that you will have to have, which I guess we should have went down a radio shack about some, is a little nice self-defeating little magnet to pass the interlock, because the laser beam cannot fire when the door is open. That's the safety thing in there. But you can build it into a little box that fits over in the corner so the customer doesn't realize it's just a magnet. You know, they can figure
Can
out
we
stuff.
physically do it?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, no, I mean, next day or?
Yeah, tomorrow. Tomorrow we'll do it.
Well, actually, I very much wanted to because of Joe's problems.
Okay, thank you.
And I, you know,
Did you get the little framing square?
whether we set aside an hour tomorrow, yeah, whether we set aside an hour tomorrow where everybody that wants to see it, we all come over here and do it, you know, we'll have to do something. Because
Right.
It's very, either that or what we can do is, let's not, I got an idea. Let's not go to the Fado tonight. We'll stay over here and work till midnight.
Done.
Okay.
I thought it was a la-di-da.
He's gonna get slapped.
You do, by the way, it is not something that you just jump in the middle of to line the beam on this thing. It's definitely, you got to start here and work your way around. You
Believe me,
can't start.
That's why I want to hear it instead of you talking on the phone.
Good, excellent.
What
The
happened?
mirrors are rated to 1500.
Why don't you show?
However, as Joe pointed out to you
Should be able to.
yesterday when we were talking, you can damage the mirrors by overheating them, by letting them get dirty. And as much as you wouldn't think it, even the primary mirror, the one inside the case, can get dirty. And there is a little inspection door on the back of the laser with an interlock on it that you can open and expose the primary mirror, and you can clean it in there. You don't have to remove it to clean it. And what I was saying earlier about the optics warranty is, if there's a manufacturing defect in that optic, we'll replace it. But if I get one in that looks like one of these three here, or I'll get one that has pits all burned in it from all the dirt being vaporized on it, we're going to deny a warranty on it. I refuse to buy a $600 lens for somebody because they neglected it. It won't happen. Don't even try it. And so it's important that you stress these people to this same sheet that they need to be able to keep these things clean. And they can. I mean, it's very easy to clean them, and it just takes a minute, and it should be part of it. It should be like flossing your teeth. You just do it and forget about it, you know.
Yeah, but you shouldn't clean unless it's dirty.
I wouldn't clean it unless it's dirty. I mean, I wouldn't do it for the sake of cleaning. However, I can tell you from doing it a lot, lazy with this a lot, they're going to get dirty.
Be a daily check.
A daily check.
I mean, I would love it. I would love it if the software, Jay, when you hit F1 and you had laser table selected, that first download of the day it said, "Have you cleaned your optics and rails?"
One of the things we talked about is there's a timer in here. And one of the things we talked about yesterday was actually making it where every 25 hours, when you turn it on, it brings up a message here. You know? So I mean, we're open for it. Remember, what we've got here is a blank page that's only been partially filled. We have all kinds of great ideas. All we have to do is implement things like timers and, you know, messages of the day to come up and things like that. We can do that. So anything you see to make life easier for you. Because the only maintenance on this machine is cleaning it and occasionally lubricating.
Well, if
That's
I
it.
have a customer who does this, I'm sure going to be in a better position with him when I say, hey, you got to pay $600 for a lens. They say, well, nobody told me to clean it. Well, first off, I made you sign off on the training to do it. And second off, it comes up on the software in the NIT file at any time.
My suggestion was to put a big ugly red sign around the inside of this cover that every time you lift it, you got to look at it that says, have you cleaned your lens today? You know, so we may do that.
That little panel, you have to push back to get into it.
Okay, we talked about the mirrors and cleaning them, the control boards and stuff. All the electronics are contained in this box on the side here. They're self-contained. They're in a box. If you have a major failure on this unit, you don't have to take them all apart. You can actually remove the box and replace the box. It's all plugged in. And that is very similar to the way the MPU works, our own electronics, so you don't have to go in and actually fix a board. You can just replace the whole electronics.
There are some key lights and everything on the main controller board, which when you guys get this book here and everything, it'll go through and explain which ones show the interlocks, which ones show the limit switches, left limit switches, right limit switches. You go through some simple diagnostics, so when one of us is talking to you on the phone, you can sit there and go through and say, okay, yeah, when I move this over, the limit switches will work.
That's it.
There's supposed to be a cutoff there, drop money in.
Okay. Well, I'm out.
The hiding?
We owe this one.
So you want hidings now?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Hi, Vince. Good, how you doing?
John, next meeting's hardware to introduction through and there. That's the next you.
Yeah.
This morning.
Yeah, and I had that flew off Western. Good move.
They just fit me in. They just fit you in? So would you have a ticket a while ago?
This age keeps up to the point.
John was telling me,
Your
I
life,
was
your life here.
amazed that that would happen.
Everything you
That
need.
makes sense to me.
I think
that's a
I do
lot.
back it up every night. I do have one about 10 years.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you're covered, I knew that.
And before they start lining the mirror, step that down there, take the lens out. Take it out of focus. Hit one shot. If you get a perfectly round dot, no matter where it's at on, you get a perfectly round dot, you're not flipped. If you get a misshaped dot,
Kind of like, it's not hitting the center of the river.
it's either one of two things. It's either hitting the edge of one of the mirrors or it's ricocheting off the city. And you can actually get the ricochet off.
What happens when you're pushing center?
Oh, no monitor.
Yeah, so usually, I would take the two back.
Memory just starts to go.
One of the concerns I have about weather and making sure they're all right. That first mirror and everything. I mean,
Can I make the offer to these folks,
underneath there
since the
and
class
right
is
in front
so
of
short, that if at 12:30, we're going to serve lunch at 12, give y'all a half hour break.
You know, in places where trash is goes in there or whatever.
Tell them they can come back after classes if they feel
It's not really protected or anything.
We're going to have to set aside an hour,
Yeah, it's been around.
sometime between today and tomorrow afternoon.
That
Go over
finger
and
goes
do
definitely
it.
works.
It's not, I mean, we're going to have to set aside an hour.
I stuck my finger.
What about tomorrow afternoon?
Can we do the lining
Yeah,
mirror?
we can do that. What we can do is we're going to be in three separate classes.
Right.
We're going to have a laser over at the other.
And up there, right?
So what we can do is move the meeting teaching from here to over there.
Somebody must be thinking that. But we need to, I need to think back.
That's the number one. I know. That's the number one question is the beam line, right?
Maybe we could, right after lunch, go right to that and then right back into the software class.
Or we have another session.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Another
checked
session
that
right now,
a few minutes ago, and it wasn't-
and then as I was saying, I was asking Jay, what I was gonna do is go around to each of the classes and let them know that at about 12:30, quarter to 1, they can come back to the sessions they felt like they didn't get enough out of, and just generally ask questions.
One
You
thing
guys
I-
are gonna be swamped.
One thing that has come out of this already, two things I see. We need to get with Joe and get the part numbers for the cleaning, cloth, what do you call it, stuff?
It's a lint-free cloth.
And we need to buy this stuff in quantity and package it as little retail kits. Yes. And also, I think
That's what
that
I
it
was
would,
doing, Jay.
okay, well, fine, if you're
No,
retail,
you can I would rather you be in the supply booth.
Okay, well, whatever, somebody needs
How
to
you
do it.
doing? We missed you for dinner last night, I'm sorry. Did I give you the wrong? I gave Paul, I think, the wrong direction as well. I don't know if you tried to find us last night. I
Well,
hope not.
we went out hunting, trying to find some places. We couldn't find Google.
Wayne, we ordered this cool weather in for you.
All right. Glad you got some here. The last room didn't have it. I'm ready.
We'll get you some local cuisine.
Yeah, that was a fact.
Hey, how's it going? Get to sit down this time.
Oh, where?
What house you at?
Who sits here?
You.
Oh.
You get front and center.
Front and center.
Doing fine, doing fine.
Ladies.
Well, one's in preschool. The
Our electronics, they basically get the hand-me-down computers, so they're still on 386s and 486s. This is a feature where you can check to see if your board is being initialized. We basically exit to DOS and we change to the Xenetech directory, and then we use a command that's called boot86. Now this command will automatically initialize the APU board. So what I do is the syntax is I type in boot86 and then the address afterwards. Now whenever I press enter, I should receive a message if everything's okay saying APU initialized and loaded at address 298. Now whenever I do that, just to confirm that everything's working, I can do a cutter down. I don't know if you can hear, I've got a test board down here. I can do a cutter up and down, and I can do a mechanical home, both of which should work at this point. So all we're doing is we're initializing the APU board in DOS to make sure that there's no address conflicts or IRQ conflicts, and it's just a confirmation that there's nothing wrong with the electronics. Okay? Now if you don't get this message, this is what the other message will look like. And again, I'm trying to initialize at address 280. And I press enter, you get the message saying, warning, APU not initialized. Now, when the APU is not initialized, make sure that your cable connections will have to be connected. Also, typically this could be an IRQ conflict problem. It could be an address problem that prevented it from initializing. It could also mean, if it's an existing customer, that maybe the APU board is just not seated well in the computer. So this is a very useful tool. Now, to let you know, for those of you who had customers that started out with installation of 3.11 or 4.11, they don't have this utility. They don't have this file in their directory. All you need is the executable file, which is boot86.exe, which is on the version 5 CD, which you all, if you haven't received already, you can receive. You get one before you leave here today. You can take this file with you. You can email. We can email the file to you if you need it. It's just a good thing to have with you when you're going to do an installation.
Where'd that name come from? I get confused because I used to have that other one there, Boot APU or something.
Okay, Boot APU is for the old boards, the old 8-bit boards. Boot 86 has to do with the processor on the board. It's a 186 processor. Just like we have an APU 88 processor, which was just a 088 processor, and APU 86, which is the 186, which this is our processor chip on the board.
When you go to that half board, you'll have a different kind. You'll have a new.
No, you'll still have the same addresses. We have 25 boards in stock. I think John's making some software changes, but we're going to deplete our stock of these boards, and then we'll start shipping the half cards.
So if you do eventually put them in next year, it's like making this one smaller, when you get to use smaller, but you're going to keep that.
Right. I mean, if we eventually go to the situation of connecting the serial cable, then right, we'll have the APU board in there. Probably we'll stay with the same size case. But that's going to open up, if we go to a serial connection, that's going to open up a great deal of possibilities for customers that want to run their machines in balls and where they want to just use a laptop. It'll make the 912 much more portable.
Will the new card fit in the laptop?
Doing that?
Will the new card fit in the laptop?
No,
you
card-
won't need it.
yeah, you won't
This is
need
a
it.
serial connection. I'm saying when you get the serial connection working. Yeah, the half card actually will work easier in the what they call it, the docking station, or also they've got the lunchbox kind thing. I don't know what they call it. They call it lunchbox? Luggable. Which is about, typically they're about this thick as opposed to this thick.
A lot of these new computers, they don't give you a full length anymore anyway, especially in those ISA.
Right.
They're always blocked by the fan.
Right. So yeah, I mean, this is gonna. You're not have to worry about LED connections when you. For those of you who install boards into the new motherboards nowadays, you have to worry about the LED connectors. You have to worry about CPU cooling fan. You have to worry about the case size. Compact is notorious. Just one example for having a case that's just too small, by maybe an eighth or a quarter of an inch, and it just that's a big problem. Okay, going from the APU board back to the motor power unit. By the way, APU stands for Auxiliary Processing Unit, for those of you who are interested in Xenetech trivia. The MPU is motor power unit. You notice we've got several components in here, but mainly we've got, this is called the motherboard. The motherboard has the cable connectors on the back, and it's got the driver board connectors on the front. Now, on this board, basically each connector is labeled which axis it pertains to. We've got our X, our Y, our Z, and our R. Now, for those of you who have customers who have multiple head machines, we've used the R before in the past for a secondary head, because each motor, of course, requires its own driver. But this now is being reserved. We're using this for our rotary attachment. So if you have a customer who has a multiple head machine that wants the round fixture that we're using, then we're going to have to, I'll have to talk to John. We'll probably have to set up some special cases. Or the MPU will have to come in here and we'll have to do some wiring to independent drivers. We have in the past, we've got spare space in here for basically 2 more drivers. We can actually mount other drivers here and run wires to the different connectors. So it actually becomes a slave of that other axis. All right. As far as on the board itself, we've got some other circuits that are important here. One of the main important ones are for the motor speed control. We have this U5 is listed here for the motor speed control. Now, on older systems, I'm going to say older systems means pre-1995, they had a 6-pin chip on there, which is an optical isolator chip which went bad. And the symptom is the spindle will not work in auto, it works in on. First thing you do is you open up the case, look on U5 and see if you have a 6-pin chip there. If you don't have a 6-pin chip, you're going to have a transistor and a resistor soldered into those 6 pins. And that's the configuration we use now. Now, Robbie brought up a point. He had a customer that apparently the resistor we had here was not strong enough. So what would happen is it would kick it on in auto, but then the motor would stay on. See, that this resistor actually pulls the voltage down low enough that the transistor is not running anymore. It's not making connection. Now, he found out what size resistor. I'm sure he's going to tell our engineer we're going to make the change. But apparently we were right at the cutoff, which typically I don't have that problem. But there's something slightly different in his system that caused that problem. Now, if a customer has a problem like this, unless you yourself are familiar with soldering on boards, or they are, it's best for them to send this in to us and let us make the change when it's convenient to them. Now remember, they're still going to be able to run in the on position. It's just not automatically going to kick on. This controls the automatic signal. And basically, a minus 12 volts comes in to close these relays in the motor speed control itself. Now, sometimes it can just be a bad transistor that has to be replaced. It just depends. Whenever we get it in here, we check it.
Is that the same circuit that's used to close and open solenoids on like retros?
Nope. This circuit right here is what's used for the solenoid. The solenoid is a much higher voltage. This is just minus 12 volts, and the solenoid, I think, it's over 20 volts DC to close the solenoid. So if a customer has an air-driven Z-axis, we have the circuitry on this board that controls the opening and the closing of the solenoid to let the air pressure go through and drive the Z down. For Dahlgrens, for Newing Halls, exactly. Now, the next component we have here that's very important is the driver board. Now, driver board assemblies on our big systems are all identical. These boards are exactly the same, which means that for troubleshooting purposes, if we have an axis, it seems that the problem's only in one axis, we can swap those two driver boards and see if the problem transfers to the other axis. If it transfers to the other axis, then we've confirmed that it's a bad driver board. We can ship you or your customer a replacement, and they can be up and running the next day, or if they're in Canada, day after next. If everything goes okay at the border. On the driver board itself, also, we have these dip switches that control the output current. Now, standard settings for our motor power units for the bigger tables, 1313 and larger, are 1 and 2 are on and 3 is off. For the 912 systems, 1, 2, and 3 are on. Now, if you have a customer that has a problem with the driver board and they go to swap the drivers, always check and see if the end pins are burnt. If they're burnt in any way, if they're not bad, sometimes you can clean them, but typically it's from these were not set correct, or something was set wrong here, or it just wasn't making a good connection. If they're burnt bad enough, they'll have to be replaced. And we'll have to do that here. Or again, if you have a technical site, if you all are very technical, we can send the connectors and you can solder them. We typically don't like to do that unless someone's very experienced, because if you put too high a wattage on this motherboard, you'll burn traces. And that means the whole motherboard will have to be replaced. As opposed to like a $15 connector. All right. Now, the one driver that's different from all the others is the driver for the Z-axis on the 912. You'll notice this Z motor on this 912 is very small. We actually have to come in and put a added resistor to drop the current even lower. Once we drop it lower, then at that point it's not going to overheat this motor and cause it to start losing steps or gaining steps. Sometimes it'll even gain steps and have problems with Z.
Sorry, can you say how much more?
We have one driver that's different from all the others. All the other drivers are universal. They may have different settings on this, which you can change those
I'm
settings.
not coming up there. Just like losing steps or gaining steps on the Z.
What can happen is this motor overheats. The signals don't come through clearly. Okay? And it can cause unpredictable results.
So,
in other words, it may not raise all the way back up to the home position every time it goes, and eventually by the end of the plate, it's dragging, or it may possibly not go down all the way to the table.
I'll be quick because I know it's not relevant.
No, go ahead.
With our settings, there's that possibility that with a 240 into it that it's going to overheat. So I've had a few Z problems.
Well, except for the fact that really the only way that would be possible is if there were a problem with the transformer.
Yeah.
Not sending the correct voltage to the motherboard.
Yeah.
Because remember, these are output into DC voltage, which is around 35 volts, I believe. It's right around that. The transformer controls the conversion of a 220 in. Now, I don't know, in your special case, maybe there's some conditioning that needs to be done of the DC voltage.
Possibly. And I've had a couple of things people doing manual set with the Z-axis, and I've had that very recently. That's actually increased.
Where it gets increased, lower and lower. I mean, there could be other problems there too. The spindle motor can cause interference, which can make the same problem occur, which you always want to do in that test I was telling you about before.
Yeah.
What we do to test to see if it is actually losing steps is we put masking tape on the motor, and this motor has a nut that you can just make a mark with a marker. whenever it spin, this will spin when it goes down, you make a mark at every depth that's going. I recommend slow your speeds way down so you have time to make the mark. And what you'll do is you'll see that every time it comes down, it hits that line. If it's gaining steps or losing steps when it's raising up, it will actually, the line will go slightly past each one of the marks and get lower and lower and lower. Now, we run this test with the motor on and with the motor off. If it doesn't occur with the motor off, then we know that the spindle motor is generating some interference that's causing that motor to lose steps or gain steps. It could lose steps on its way up, or as it's going down, it could gain steps, just depending on the potential problem. Now, if that's a case on the bigger systems, sometimes isolating the ground can solve the problem, which all that means is the power going into the motor speed control is plugged into a different power source or different circuit from the actual electronics. If you have both of them plugged into the same power strip, typically power strips don't filter between the outlets. So interference can be fed back through the ground, back into the electronics, which can cause one of the drivers to step or not run correctly. All right?
So what you're saying is then, how do we know which one's which? I mean, just something
Well, if you-
physically we can see the difference?
On the resistor all the way to the left,
Oh, it's
is
a little
different.
different color, okay.
It's a lower resistor. Now, they have been marking on the Z ones. They mark on the connector itself Z.
I see.
They really ought to put 912Z, but I mean, it's the only one that's different. So therein, if you have a customer that they can't run it this way, but if they're trying to troubleshoot the problem, they can swap their Z and their Y or their X to see if it's a problem with the driver. Just as a test, they can just run a test to see if everything's okay. They cannot run it that way. So when they send the replacement back, they've got to make sure that their boards are in the correct location so that they're replacing the correct driver. Plus, they have to let us know for sure which axis it is on the 912 because that's important. If we send them a driver for an X or a Y and it ends up they need a Z, they're not going to be able to run. If you run for any period of time on these motors, it'll actually, like I said, it'll heat up the motor and they're going to start having problems. If you run for an extended period of time, they may end up having to replace the motor itself. All right, motor speed controls. This is our standard motor speed control for our larger tables. And if you look inside, we have the motor speed control board, and we've got two relays. One for the auxiliary switch, which they've got it screwed down. One for the auxiliary and one for the spindle. Now, the electronics must be on in order for the spindle motor or the auxiliary to kick on. They receive a minus 12 volt signal that comes in and they have to have that signal in order for the relay to close. Now, the board that we use on this is a standard motor speed control board. Basically, it inputs from L1 and L2 on here. It inputs either 110 volts or 220 volts and converts it over into 90 volts DC, which is what we output to our motors. Now, the amount of DC voltage that's outputted and the amount of current is all controlled with these potentiometers at the bottom. If you look on them, they have an arrow pointing to the position that they're at. Just a real small arrow in the white part. Okay? Maybe y'all can turn the camera around and look at it. Now, the different potentiometers on there that we may concern ourselves with, let's say, for example, we were replacing a Leeson motor with a grow shop. So we're replacing the 8 horsepower motor with the quarter horsepower motor. If we're doing that, we may have to change our output DC voltage, which is controlled by the max speed pot that's on that board. What we do is we set a voltmeter between A1 and A2, which are the outputs going to the DC motor, and we turn the max speed until that reads for a grow shop 78 volts, for a Leeson 90 volts. So just be aware, we do have Leeson motors in stock, and these basically we swapped over to the grow shop in late 97 or early 98. We swapped over to the quarter horsepower motors. So if you have a table that was manufactured before then, have them look on the motor itself to see if it says Leeson, and we can replace that motor, or if they want to upgrade to the higher horsepower motor, it's about the same price for replacement. And they just have to make a few changes. Now, if you look on the board, you have another setting there that's for IR comp. If you ever have a motor that's fluctuating, it'll go real high RPMs and then drop down and then raise back up, so you can hear the motor surging back and forth. That could be a brush problem. The brushes could be bad. It also could be, as the brushes started to wear, as the motor started to get a little newer, the IR comp, which controls that fluctuation, maybe needs to be readjusted. And what we do is we just turn that counterclockwise a little bit at a time until that fluctuation goes away in the motor. Whenever I said before setting the DC voltage, one thing I didn't tell you was that your RPMs, that's with your RPMs all the way at 10. 90 volts for the Leeson, 78 for the Grow Shop, with the RPMs turned all the way to 10, and with, of course, your spindle motor switch in the on position. Now,
Is this the new auto speed control?
no, that's for a retrofit. That motor speed control actually has nothing but a relay in it. For people that have AC motors, they still want their spindle motors to automatically kick on. So what we can do is we just put a relay in there. You receive the signal coming from your adapter cable. You have this third wire. Michael, I'll move over a little bit maybe. I think you're photographing your back. This cable basically plugs into the adapter cable coming off of that, and it'll automatically kick on an AC motor. Now, likewise, if you have a customer that has a Dahlgren that has a universal motor, which can be AC or DC, or if you have a customer that just has a retrofit that's going to be a DC motor, we can adjust the settings on that board for their particular motor. You know, just depending on what their motor is rated at, 90 volts or whatever, we can adjust it for that. And again, the motor speed control is not considered part of a standard retrofit price. That is an added cost. Now, as far as other potential problems with the surging, this resistor, this white resistor, we've had a problem. This has been in the past. I think we've really captured most of these problems. This was a bad solder joint. You could actually wiggle this resistor and the surging would go away. So to solve that, basically we just resolder that resistor on the back side of the board.
Sounds like that ground problem, remember, in the MPU.
Another thing you can check, if you have ground wires inside the MPU. Try to turn this where you can see. You've got one up here. You've got one right here to the right of the transformer. You see they're screwed directly into the sub panel.
They weren't before, though.
Yeah, they were before. Oh, you mean which? You mean on
One that went into I thought there was one that went into the box.
Yeah, there's one right here in the center of the board. See, there's a ground wire right there. Is that what you're talking about?
No, we had a problem with one of the blocks. And it was causing the machine to do funny things. It's just a bad ground.
We had a customer, actually, Bovie Trophies. They had this problem twice. It just finally we got them to make sure that they were torqued down. But yeah, you can have some unpredictable results. The table can do really strange things if you have a bad ground in here.
It'll work for a while and then it'll go funny and it'll look at
Yeah, and basically what's happening is a ground wire in Bovie Trophies, it would make connection, and then it would lose connection. Make connection, lose connection. So it worked fine for a week, and then all of a sudden they had the problem back again. So that was kind of a hard one to diagnose, and finally
Where's the second ground?
see you had this ground wire here, you have one right here. See that?
Oh, right there, okay.
And you also have a ground wire on the motor speed control board itself. If you see there's a green wire that runs right to the center of the board. All right. Any questions on any of the components we're talking about here?
How come you don't standardize your color for that?
That's a good question. We should be using, instead of orange, it should be green.
Green. I don't need it.
Oh, well, that's the...
Unless it's electronics, then it's black.
No, it's the orange coming off. That must be the ground that we're using from the transformer, so we don't really have any control over that unless we connect it to a green wire.
Base table.
We need to tell John about that. He needs to. You're right. It should be green as a standard.
You know, there are no rules on.
That's true.
For CE, right? For CE approval, probably have to do that. Now we have a different motor speed control board that's used on the 912. This motor speed control board takes AC voltage in and outputs DC voltage. This motor speed control board receives in DC voltage. So it's powered by the power coming in is coming from the transformer as opposed from an outside source. So it's already been converted to DC voltage before it even reaches this board.
You mean, it goes through here, then through the rectifier, then DC.
Right.
DC only.
Right. The AC comes into this transformer, it's converted, and then it's run to this board. Okay?
I mean, why?
Well, the reason why we changed to this board as opposed to the other is because of the proximity location, we had a hard time isolating ground and filtering. We had a lot of problems with the going to the globe motor. So what we ended up doing is going to this board, which the DC voltage coming in, we don't have as much problem with interference and fluctuation of the motor.
Yes, you want it, Jimmy?
Okay. All right. You notice this board is different. It only has 4 pots, plus the connections are different. Now you may have some original 912 customers out there that still have the old style board. If they start having some problems with their spindle motor, then it may be something we need to look at as far as interchanging this out. It's not simply just changing the board out. There's a few other things that have to be changed too. Because this new board here has a relay that's mounted on the board, and older systems had a relay mounted on the sub panel itself.
Is that a plug-in ice cube relay there, or is it soldered?
I believe it is hard soldered. It's soldered.
Yes, sir.
All right, so that's basically the pendant that we have here. This is a very reliable component. The only time I've had failure in this component is in a machine shop environment. People let metal debris fall through the gaps in the switches, and it ends up getting inside on the board and shorting out the board, shorting out a chip on the board. So to troubleshoot that would have to come into us for us to fix it or repair it. All right, now we're going to talk about retrofits.
Before we do that, what about cleaning? I mean, I had never told anybody about that. Y'all seen
As
it
far
come
as-
back or had any call?
It actually, the way the fan is set in this, instead of the fan blowing out, it blows in. Because you notice we have some holes here. If we had the air blowing out like we do for this, we'd actually suck chips in from these holes, which would bring all kinds of debris inside here. So what we do is the fan blows in, which stabilizes an air pressure, so it sucks through the fan. Now, as any of the electrical components, if you open it up and there's a lot of dust and a lot of things in there, of course, blow it out. And that dust can build up and it can cause problems. Inconsistencies with the way the machine runs and things like that.
Should we tell the customers to check that every once in a while?
Every once in a while would be maybe,
Once a year.
once a year, maybe. Just, make them aware that, especially if they're in a dirty environment. Say that their machine,
Plastic grade.
yeah, I mean, not just plastic grade, but say they're in an environment where they're operating several different types of equipment in the same area, a wood shop or something, they need to maybe clean it out more often than that. Okay, we have several quick attach adapter cables. These adapter cables basically are wired so that they plug into the table cable connection, and then these cables will plug into the standard cables coming off of the machine. Of course, this is for your motor speed control signal. Now, as I said before, this just has a relay, so if you have an AC motor, you could just connect it to this, as opposed to the standard portable motor speed control for a DC motor. Now, this is for a System 1 retrofit. We can retrofit System 1 Dahlgrens, System 2 Dahlgrens, System 300s. There is a special case with the System 300 that has the high-speed, high-frequency spindle that actually has the motor on the top of the spindle. That has to come into us for us to run, for us to do retrofit. I'm sorry, the table itself doesn't. the spindle and the board case that they have, the motor speed control case has to come in to us, and we actually wire it up and make a special case for them so that they can use that high frequency spindle.
In demo retrofits, we have special cable made, so you have to plug this in right here. Right?
Right. Well, what you can do is you can take a standard table cable with a gender changer and plug this in if you need more length. Okay?
Can you convert the spindle on a Dogger, say 300, to a motor control, like a Prox sensor sort of,
You mean so it'll
automatic
sense the surface?
Yeah. Can you
It would require some wiring on your part or our part to do so.
We could do a system 2. Jason, we do a system 2.
For the Prox, the proximity sensor uses 3 wires, which if you can get 3 wires out to this cable, we can certainly run a Prox. Now our Prox is a 12 volt Prox, isn't it? Ben?
Yeah.
It's a 12 volt Prox. And
what if they've got an air system now? How do we get an air system to a motor control?
oh well, no, that
different.
takes
That's got to come back to you.
that means that has to
So,
go
I
back
mean,
to
it
us.
wouldn't be worth it.
It's going to be an expensive upgrade.
Wouldn't be worth it.
I'm not sure exactly what the cost. I believe it's around $2,000 because they have to entire
New
Z
machine.
entire Z backing plate, the Z motor, all the wiring has to be run. So for right now, someone that was going to do something like that, they would just stay with their air-driven Z. So we can do a 300Z. We can also do other air-driven Zs like the Newing Hall tables, TLC 200s, TLC 300s, and TLC 400s. Now, the 400s may potentially have to come in here for rewire because there's an inconsistency there. We have a customer who has a TLC 400 that ended up using a TLC 200 adapter cable because of the way the table was wired. So it may cause a little trial and error when they have to do some work, which Lynn has a customer that had some problems on a retrofit of a Meister. Actually, it's a customer we're talking about. He had a TLC 400. Now, in order for an in order for a Newing Hall to be able to use its round attachment, it has to have limit switches. And or the limit switch connections have to be jumpered out in this cable. So either they're going to put limit switches on it, or they're going to send the table to us and we'll put limit switches on it, or we'll have to make a special cable for them so that they can use the round attachment.
Say for like I was saying to you earlier on, Jimmy, if you get one made up, then for demo purposes, if you want to just run it.
Certainly. For demo purposes, we make one up. Just make sure if we jumper it out at the cable that they never press mechanical home. Mechanical home will go, and basically your motors will go until they grind and grind and grind and grind until you turn the electronics off. So if you have a customer that does that, put a big black piece of tape over the top of the mechanical home switch and say, never ever use. Okay? We also can hook up to H-square systems and Meistergram systems we can retrofit. It's a standard 25-pin connector, very similar to the System 2, but not exactly the same. And the only special cases are
912s and 1612s.
which they require, instead of they're rated at 1.2 amps, I believe, which means that we have to use 3 Z drivers, 3 912Z drivers, because they're the only ones that have the current low enough for those motors. So if you have an H-square or an H-square or a Meistergram 912 or 1612, call us before you do that. Now, we cannot retrofit to the servo systems right now. We've talked about possibly coming up with a set of electronics that we can do that with, but right now we can't drive the servo systems with our electronics.
The only thing we can do there is get the machine in here and put in stepper motors.
And that's an option. It's going to be an expensive option. Stepper motors are $200 a piece retail. So if they just have to stay with that system, and they want our electronics, we can do that. But again, I think that eventually we're going to have a servo system that we can connect to those tables. Of course, with the H-square Meistergrams, we can run our software will run their machine. With the older H-square controllers, there has been a letter quality problem. It's mainly has to do with their electronics and the way our software outputs. So they may not be satisfied with the H-square system. I highly recommend giving them a demo software to try out. And when they're satisfied, then we'll give them the unlock code and send them the manuals. Okay. By the way, the demo software, the 5.0, has everything turned on for 21 days. Your customers can use spell check. They can use all options. The only thing they don't have are the all fonts, because we have no way of pulling those back off the system after we put them on. So they can test these different things, like running a Meistergram or running an H-square. You can give them the demo software and say, how do you like it? You can use it if you want to hook up to another laser, or you want to hook up to some other type system. You can use the demo software to see if the customer's satisfied. We have, I'm not sure if many of you run across many microstepper upgrades. If you have a microstepper upgrade, we want you to schedule that with us, so the customer is down as little as possible, and also it helps us, as far as making sure that we we don't have the system sitting here for a day or two unnecessary. What typically we like to do is we like to get the microstepper upgrades in on a Thursday. We will go ahead and do the upgrade on Friday. It'll burn in over the weekend, and barring any problems, it'll ship out on Monday, which means the customer, except for shipping time, it's only going to be here at our location for 3 days, which opposed to 4 days in the same scenario in the middle of the week. Okay. Any questions about different retrofits or things that you've run across, or
On a H-square 2818.
Okay.
If you done a retrofit to it, change the stepper motors out, would it increase the speed quite a bit?
Actually, with
On
going
the,
from a
2818 S's, which were
With the
the old
stepper.
with the steppers.
Oh yeah,
They
and I don't
were
know.
terribly slow.
Now, I'm sure it would increase the slow. See, part of the advantage of going to our electronics is how we process data, how we actually ramp on the curves and things. In a standard job, the actual traversing speed may not be different, but a job's going to grade much faster. Plus, you're increasing the resolution of their table from 800 steps per inch to 3,200 steps per inch. The table's going to be much quieter and much more accurate as far as it's going to take out smaller chunks of material as it's engraving. You're going to notice a big difference.
Transversing speed.
It's potentially could be different. We'd have to run them side by side to see. It just depends on the differences between their controller and our controller. The table itself hasn't changed. And going from 3,200 steps or 800 steps to 3,200 steps increases your resolution. It doesn't increase your speed. But if our drivers process faster than the drivers on that table, then yes, it would increase the speed.
Well, it does increase the speed, right? It makes the machine run much better, and I'm speaking from experience because that's what I did back in Connecticut. I had a 2818.
Do you change the stepper motors
No,
themselves?
use the same motors, just hook it up to Xenetech electronics.
That's like dogman. I mean, how much faster is the 300? It's like night and day.
Yeah.
Put the electronics on there. It's like, that's the same table? Amazing.
A lot quieter.
Oh, a lot quieter, yeah.
Well, in contrast, if you're upgrading, doing a microstepper upgrade on an old IE table, the speed is no different. Basically, our
Noises.
controllers, the resolution and the sound. I mean, I don't know how much in decibels it goes down, but it's incredibly different.
Well,
I mean, you can actually carry on a conversation.
I went to one guy's shop and they were wearing earphones, and I plugged the Xenetech electronics in there. We're just sitting there. I was going, "Oh, this is the first time I ever did." I'm like, "Holy shit!" Couldn't hear. Like we could talk to each other, and it's amazing.
That's what happened to me. My wife came into the shop and said, "What's wrong with your machine?" I said, "What?" She said, "It doesn't make any more noise."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, on the retrofits, I'm sure you already know, they've got 2-year warranties, just like our standard electronics on retrofits. So, the one thing that I know that the main question that I have people ask on retrofits are hooking up the spindle motor to our motor speed control, and all it truly requires is wiring in a connector that's got this kind of a connector on it. And if for DC and for AC, wiring in a cable that has just a standard connector on it. And from then, basically you're bypassing whatever means they had to control the speed of the motor before, and you're using ours. Of course, in the AC motor, you're just using it to turn it off and on. That's about it. Any questions?
One thing I'll mention for Dave and that is they're new. Make sure the cables are tight. on all of this, because that's the number one problem.
I mean, it's, some people say, some people feel we may sometimes give them a standard answer of, we checked your cable connections, but honestly, a lot of times customers say, if they're having a really strange problem, we'll just say, okay, disconnect and reconnect your cables, which does two things. Make sure that they're good and tight, but it also, if there's any corrosion built up, it'll clean the corrosion off just by disconnecting and reconnecting. And, a lot of times, I don't know if I'd say as high as 50%, but a lot of times it's just a poor connection. Sometimes it's a poor connection on the APU board. You take the APU board out and clean these connectors with, either a contact cleaner or rubbing alcohol, make sure it's dry, and then put it back in. And a lot of times that'll solve the problem. If you run across an old standard setup of Xenetech electronics, one of the things that we always ask the customers to do, take the board out, and the old board had chips in it. Press in all the chips. Because that board was notorious for the chips to, one chip, maybe a couple pins, are not making good connection. And they'd lose control of their Z-axis, or or their motors will only travel in one direction.
That was a once a month fix for new Hermes. Take the card out, push everything back in, slide it in.
And this is one of the reasons it does make things more modular, but soldering the pins in makes a more reliable system. And, we don't, typically with the APU board, if we can get it to initialize and run, I mean, unless something happens power-wise to blow something out, we don't have any problems with the APU board. It's very reliable.
Remember one of the first demos we remember in Windsor? We didn't tighten the cable up, and for an hour and a half we sat there and reseated the board and did it, and then all of a sudden realized we didn't tighten the cable up on the table.
And we also had the problem with the switch, being
Steppers
being
yeah,
out.
stepper motor switch.
We found about that one too.
Well,
everybody does that one. Yeah.
Everyone has.
Internally, we really, it's not. We've got the LED on this.
No, idiot light.
Yeah. we don't call.
Why do they call it
that? We don't tell the customer that's what that light is.
We don't say that.
But eventually, we're going to go to a new case that's going to have the holes for those connections on this pendant.
Smart light.
Yeah, smart light.
Also, it flashes for the pause switch too. Which this is even. That's on. So we can turn that on. Of course, there's that flashing light. If you haven't seen it before, there's that flashing light. So makes it easier on us. Okay, you have a 912 or any lights flashing on the pendant.
Exactly. Yep.
No, the cutter switch doesn't have a.
Cutter
It
switch.
sure does.
It
Sorry,
does,
that's
yeah.
not the LED.
Yeah.
It's not the switch.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because we've had calls. Machine doesn't go down and engrave. Where's the
Cutter switch is not in the.
It's
yeah,
enough.
it's
Well,
not.
It's okay when we got it, but don't do that anymore.
How do you tell the customer that and not make them feel stupid?
Exactly. That's your job.
Put holes while you laugh.
You bring them in. You bring them into your confidence and say, "It'll be our little secret."
I've been there though. I have sympathy because I've been there. I mean, I've done it, so.
How about the power strip wasn't turned on or?
I had a customer. I've had customers before. Hey, I download my machine. Even though you have a message that comes up, check the power switch on the MPU. I keep getting this message and it won't download. Well, okay, is the power switch on the MPU? What's the MPU? That's another thing that I'm sure that y'all's responsibility is to make them familiar with what we call these components, so that we're not speaking Greek to them whenever they call us or whenever they call y'all.
I usually have them play everything into a power strip,
Mhm.
and the computer doesn't go on, so then I know. what they have to
Exactly,
use.
which would solve that problem.
Is the reset button a melting alloy?
I have no idea.
Sometimes it took over an hour for that to reset, just because it was hotter.
It shouldn't take that long to reset. You mean the driver boards themselves, if they shut down? Is that what you're talking about, or?
I don't remember what the problem was, but the reset button was.
I mean, I can tell you it's not anything that's going to be permanent. The melting alloy does that be a permanent. It wouldn't
Yeah,
work after that,
change
right?
the heaters out of it, but
No, then it resets
It's
itself.
just a regular switch.
I can tell you though, if I had a customer that had a problem with their ventilation and they couldn't put their MPU anywhere else, they actually had it on a cart and they rolled it different places. They didn't have any other place to put their MPU. It kept, the one driver kept thermally shutting off, shutting off, shutting off. It would happen to them, 2 or 3 times a day. And I told him, I said, you need to put it somewhere to improve the ventilation. Well, eventually, he didn't do that. Eventually, the board had to be replaced. Because of the fact that if you do it often enough, it'll damage the board itself to the point that it has to be replaced.
Can I interrupt just for a second?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're going to make a little bit of an agenda change here. We're going to have lunch. We can break in 5 or 10 minutes whenever you get finished. We're going to be serving lunch in the parking lot at 6455. Feel free to take your lunch and go in any of the buildings. Try to stay in our building, so if you don't mind.
You
Stay
can
off the
there's
street if
room
you don't
across the
mind.
street. If you want to go across the street, it's customer service.
What we're going to do is ask the facilitators. I know you guys have been talking all morning, but ask you to kind of stay put. We'll bring you lunch. We'll make sure you get the generous portion as well. But anyway, we'll bring you your lunch. And if you'd like to come back, if there's a session that you failed to make last time, or you didn't ask all the questions you'd like to ask, you can come back to that session and ask those questions. They'll be on duty from about 12:30 to 1:30. At 1:30, we'll pick up with the agenda again. And so you can go to your next class at 1:30, which is on the agenda. I was also told by Jay that the alignment on the laser, you wanted to go through the specifics of that, how to align the laser beam, which I might want to talk back here. But he said that we're going to, sometime in the agenda, we'll make some room either this afternoon or tomorrow to go through that. So if you feel uncomfortable about not knowing how to do that on the laser, don't worry, we're going to talk about that. All right? So 5, 10 minutes, whenever you think we need to.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I was just building questions at this point. So, any problems or anything that y'all run across that you'd like to discuss, or?
It drove me crazy when you first forward and backward on the pause.
What part did you not understand, or what part did you have a problem with?
It used to be forward on top, backward on pause. And then you got reversed.
Oh, it did get reversed, yeah. Yeah, you're
Those
right.
overlays are real good now too.
And when you have 2 different systems, different training, stop
Yeah.
which one's working.
Yeah, and then
You have to actually look. Yeah, I know, it took me a long time to adjust that too. Their swap. I think, yeah.
It used to be
It used to be.
down and backwards up.
The main change, the reason why that changed was on this. This actually has a board, but these are soldered to. Okay? We had to come back and change this on these tables. So you're going to run across some tables that are like this. And the 912 should all be, well, all the ones that have the new style pendant top should all be this way. Forward on top, backward on bottom. Just to run across, there's a software switch that controls whether or not this will work. Inside the let's just go back. Let's see. Yeah, pause based on character lines plate switch, yes or no. If you select no, what it pauses on is the next cutter up, as opposed to waiting until it finishes the character, the line, or the plate that it's on.
that was for logos, right?
That's for logos, right? We put that in. We put this specifically in so someone could pause in the middle of the logo.
Yeah, because if you go forward and back to a logo, it could be 30 different, forward, backwards.
So every pin up is a pause.
I thought in the logos, I thought they had a setup in there where, like, it was, if you had it set for characters for every cutter up, and then when you went to,
You have to set this. Now, some logos, you're right. It will, if it's one character, it depends on the logo. There's inconsistencies there. If you want to be sure it's going to pause the next cutter up, click on this switch to go.
Okay.
And then it'll raise. Next time it raises, it'll pause.
And can you back it up then, to the last cutter row?
Yes. Now, as far as accuracy, I mean, it seems to be pretty accurate. I haven't done a lot of testing to make sure that everything goes back, by certain increments. I'm not sure that it breaks it up into small increments, or if it just breaks it out to one object and then goes back to that object. But you can certainly go back to the beginning of the logo and restart it. Let's see, I'm trying to think of anything else.
You gotta set that before it starts on the.
Yeah, before you download it. Special functions, I assume that everybody knows this function, but maybe not. You know that if you press home retain, it brings back the last job in memory. Y'all of you know that? So after you download a job, if it finishes and you decide you want to go over it again, you don't have to download it from the software again. You just press home retain once, and it brings back the last job that was in memory.
Yeah.
Even if you home cancel in between. Now, if you press this switch, no. What this switch does is this clears out the memory on the APU board. If you have a problem that you think maybe you've got some corrupted information in the APU border and memory, if you press the reset button and re-download the job, then at that point you're starting fresh.
Even if you do it mechanical home, it'll still do.
Even if you do a mechanical home, it'll still remember it. Only if you press the reset, or if you turn the NPU off, of course, which does the same thing as a reset.
Also on the pen that if you're doing a multiple plate job, grid cutout turned on, and you want to go right to the grid only, and not do the engrave, hit the forward button, goes right directly to the grid, skips all the engraving.
The ready light will flash.
What was that again?
What was that? Yeah, say that again.
Yeah, if you're doing a multiple plate job with grid cutout, and you want to do just the grid, you do not want to do the engraving, okay, you send the job over, hit the forward switch one time forward, the green light will flash, and then when you press start, it's going to go right to the grid and skip all the engraving.
A lot of times you wanna go to the cutout again.
So you're gonna stop it, you're gonna set it out and stop it, is that what you're saying?
No, before you press start.
Just, before you press start?
Before you press start.
Okay, just hit, forward and start.
Makes no difference whether you're on a character line or plate.
No.
Okay.
That actual feature, like I said, you have to not press start for it to work. As soon as it's downloaded.
Jim Brown told us that a long time ago. First night, a couple of times, I wish I could remember.
Well, if y'all want to go ahead and go eat some lunch.
Yeah, that's what.
If you have any questions, come on back. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions.
Sneezing all day yesterday.
Yeah, well,
I don't want you to call me up next week and say, I'm sick.
I'm not, I'm known big time, man. You guys late? To move.
Rewired the
I don't want to get
jumper out.
Hey,
To jumper out the X and Y limit switches, and he did that. And then we found out that there was a problem with the cable.
Right.
The table cable was using
Well, no,
right?
we do it.
Because it wasn't making, even though we checked the adapter, it was fine, the table cable was bad, so I sent him a replace the table cable and interchange it. And after we did that, he still didn't work at the beginning of the grid. So then at that point, he found out there was an open going through comparing the different connections for the different drivers. There's an open on one driver, so he felt like he wasn't
Stop the grid. If you see the grid's not going to keep it up, and you want to readjust
I guess
your
he thought we were going to send him
get
another
one retained,
component,
she'll go home. You'll get the green light.
new adapter.
Press forward one time, the green light will flash. Press start.
If you want to follow up with the
grid.
Throw his camera, film the whole thing, he's got it all on tape. It's going on.
It's not new, it's just not used a lot, but when you need it, it's very handy.
I lost my dad.
Forward to everything. Take the text out.
You live right there.
Which is,
There you go.
thank you.
Hey, man.
I'm sick. I don't want to spread. I don't want to spread.
I already tried
Hey, I
to
really
shake.
want to pose you the whole
I already
thing.
tried to shake his hand.
Farting and sneezing.
He's sick. Didn't want it.
Really, I mean, I'm kind of like nervous about this. I mean, I don't want to do battle. I just want to play basketball. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you. And the man.
Hey,
It's probably the fall.
don't even come over here. Number one. No.
It's the fall allergy.
Howard, I am on the phone every day with Howard, giving him a lesson.
3 or 4 or 5 times a day.
Ronnie told me you were gonna
There's a guy.
give me a hard time about the system we use.
I brought bagels, man. I'll feed you, man.
Oh, well, then I'll let you slide.
No, seriously, he drives me nuts. And he keeps calling.
2 days ago.
How much you get
I
charged?
had an hour, and he wanted 45-degree slant.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I did that. Selected.
Yesterday.
And this water. Water.
Yeah.
He's critical. He called you, and he called me.
yeah.
I mean,
You gotta go first.
you take that server
He
up to
called
1,000,
me.
that's 800.
I explained it to him. You explained it to him, same with the hour.
You take it back
Okay,
down to
selected
500.
45 degrees, the whole thing.
He just stays on at 500. And
The order, I wasn't even about to go with the drawing tools. I had to go to utility fund, use box.
So you buy it.
Size it, what's there. So now I want to put another one inside.
I haven't put
You know,
again.
this chip right here is an inverter. And basically, the signal comes in, it's a positive 12 volts, inverts it here into a negative 4. And then it goes to that resistor and then back out.
If you get it down to this.
And the worst part was, I got less than half the commission. So I got trouble from River, guys up there. You know, we gives me needs, I go, but it's just having to get down to the league, so I hate
That's great. I'm glad y'all.
But you know what?
If I find it.
It's a no.
I didn't want to mess with it. I want to get it back.
Hey, you didn't have to swap out electronics or anything.
Yeah, I really did have Alright, so before the day's over, the boys team. How you doing, the boys? Got that chessboard, man?
Not with me.
Holy mackerel. Hey guys, all set for the game tonight? I know you are.
What time we gonna play?
I don't know, but I'll tell you.
Hey, we've got a basketball goal there, man.
I mean, I really came to play basketball. I didn't have the war or nothing like that. I hear like you guys are gunning. See, I'm excited because if that's the case, I'm gonna get the distributors together and like have it
So
split
did you
up
get enough,
into 2
did
teams.
you
Well,
get enough sleep last night? Or?
But you won last night.
There's dessert down there.
Barely by the skin of my teeth. She has pen and brother on a desperation shot and went in
Me like
somehow.
that, in that tone of voice. Why? Did Ted play the freshman?
Kind of hard to mistake. So I guess we're supposed to go down.
I'm on Candy Cam. Yeah, he hit the shot that went through the trees and hit the backboard and went in.
And you know what? I don't care where it goes. As long as it went in. That's all that matters. It goes through the roof. That's it. That's all I care about. But no, seriously, you guys came on strong in the end last year. Now forget that. See, you're young. You guys are young.
It took us a little time to warm
You want
up.
tartar sauce or ketchup?
We had to get
Or
our-
both?
I got a bad knee this year. I'm not making excuses. I'll pick up my pants. She's a big old, what
You're
you
not
call
allowed
it,
to
old
leave either, are you?
football
No.
injury. You know, when I got mine, it's how old I am. When I popped my knee, they didn't have arthroscopic.
Thank you.
That they did the old Joe
Kick
Namath
this thing
thing.
down.
What was that
on
message
my
for?
old thing.
I took care
Cutting
of it.
everything up. Now they go in there a little bit, suck that out.
Everything's all right.
But I hope I cover you tonight.
There
because
somewhere,
it's a
probably.
huge challenge for me. It's actually a honor to cover somebody's beach.
It's on record still. I'm looking for the.
There's something up here. What's this say?
Glad I got shorts on.
Watch this power. Shut that
Well,
off.
I'm sure that eventually he and I are going to be, butting butts on the.
Buttons on that side?
Hey, how you doing?
What's this red button right here?
What's going on?
Zoom. I don't know what this is.
Hi. Was late on the plane.
Turn it off and see.
Thank you, Northwestern. You know something? It was like 4:30 a.m. I was in New York. I got over there. I says, "You're gonna fly me to Memphis." I'm from Memphis. Am I gonna get on a plane to Baton Rouge? You guys?
Lunch cover on.
Huh?
He goes,
Lunch cap.
think so.
Still gonna record your voice.
I'm saying, should I get on this plane,
This is
man?
gonna be good.
Wind
They're
up in
gonna
the
hear us
land of
talking about how do you
Elvis.
turn
It's
this
like
stupid
the
thing
worst
off.
nightmare for me.
Iris.
You know, Elvis. I don't want to hear about Elvis.
I just keep rolling.
I don't want to be there. You know what I mean? That's not a place I want. You know, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna talk about it.
I would talk about it all. So it seems like I'm going kind of quick and you need to slow me down. Just wave or slow me down. Just the speed control, any inner workings of the speed control will be spoken about in the next class. I think y'all had that early this morning, right? The electronics class, good.
We can probably fix it.
Good. Yeah, I mean, people tell me Jimmy was doing a real good job. So, I mean, I'm glad he's doing a good job for everybody. As far as like changing the bellows and stuff, we have limit switches. Bring this on. I'm trying to get a partially built bridge here. We're going to talk about bridge limit switches and lead screws and such. It's so hard to visualize what I'm talking about when I'm pointing behind this plate. Very often, when they do, you still got to know how to do it. So hopefully that give everybody an idea of what's entailed of doing that just by looking at this.